Good morning, everyone. So today we're going to be talking about conventions. So the reason I have a bunch of signs on this first slide is because conventions is all about grammar. And something that we can notice is that on road signs specifically, we see a lack of grammar being, good grammar being used. So like with the speed limit sign and the road closed signs, they both have all capital letters. And so that's something that you can see entering into your students' writing. We also have the Eat More Chicken Chick-fil-A sign, very classic, right? With all caps, stuff's misspelled. So, I mean, these are great examples of what you should not want your student to be doing, right? And then we actually have a positive example down in the left-hand corner. The speeding ruins lives slowed down. I don't know if you can see that just because of where my picture is, but that's something that actually works really well because it's using proper grammar anyway. So we are going to talk about what conventions are. So they're the basic writing techniques we use, such as capitalization, grammar, punctuation, use of paragraphs, really everything that relates to making it easier for a reader to read the ideas that are being expressed by the writer. So, showing an understanding of conventions requires the writer to proofread their work so the audiences can easily understand any ideas they're attempting to express. And as you can see, I missed that because I put writes instead of writer. Anyway, I'll go back and fix that later. But to learn conventions, you have to be taught the convention in context. Something that I was struggling with when I was learning Spanish was learning the Spanish conventions because they're different than English. And I kept wanting to apply the English conventions. And so what was happening is I wasn't learning the Spanish conventions in context. And so it made it a whole lot harder to understand how I was supposed to be using Spanish grammar versus English grammar. So I think that's something that's really important to remember as we're teaching our students. Conventions can be difficult for students to understand, and the issues that come from them can be a result of any type of printed media, texting between friends, not being taught grammar and context like I was just talking about, and just being taught the rules of grammar. And so I think it's important to take these things into account so you at least are understanding why your students are messing these things up. And you can take time to address the issues that are happening with conventions. But you could help your students feel smart by looking for the mistakes in media, in books, in anything that they're looking at. Have them be looking at and mentally making a note of mistakes that are being made, because it will make them feel smarter, and then you can invite them to share those things with you at an appropriate time. So this is an example of something that I probably would give my students to look at and see if they can find the mistakes. So I'll give you a few seconds to look at this and then I'll start talking about it. And if you need more time, go ahead and pause the video. So first things first, there are no subjects in this at all, unless you are reading the Coca-Cola cup itself, which does not work. So the sentence tastes like $1 million does not have a subject, neither does only costs one. You still don't know what it's talking about. Also, you shouldn't have a period there. But that's, a whole different thing. Anyway, we also have $1 any size. It's on all caps. And then we have I'm loving it. That has no capitalization at all. When the I'm should. Because it's talking about me, I. I is always capitalized. So these are a few things that you can point out to your students and just share with them. There's mistakes that are all over the place in billboards and stuff like that. And so you can be looking for them all the time. So when you're grading conventions, if there's a ton of errors, the piece is only going to get a 1 or a 2. A 1 or a 2 is going to look like the writing being really hard to understand just because there are so many grammatical errors. And then if a piece gets a 3 or a 4, that means there's going to be some errors. So there's errors in various types of conventions. It's not just one convention that's being misunderstood. It's multiple types. And so overall, editing the paper wouldn't take too long. It wouldn't be too much work, but you still want the student to be able to do that. So the student's learning rather than you just doing it and just giving them the answer. And if there's no errors, the piece is going to be a 5 to a 6. So positive examples of conventions in text. So there is an example, a really good example, in the textbook on page 278 and 279. So 279 is the scoring guide that they give, but 278 is the actual writing that's given. So it's hair straightener. So I would suggest that you go ahead and look at that. I'm not going to read it for sake right now just because it's going to take too long. But another positive examples of conventions in text can be books. If they've been officially published, they're going to have good conventions usually. But you can still find mistakes if you pay close attention. My dad was an English teacher, and we have an at-home library, and I just remember going and I would pick up a book that my dad had just read, and I could tell if he had read it because there would be things marked in the book, the corrections for the things, right? Because there's some things that editors will still miss. So overall, that's about everything with conventions that I have time to cover right now. So you just want to make sure your student understands that this is important to writing, just because if you're not using proper conventions, it's really hard to understand. And then your argument becomes weaker because people don't understand you and they don't believe you anymore because you're not a reliable source. So with that, just make sure your students are the ones making the corrections rather than you, just so the corrections can be made and they'll understand. So have a good day, everyone. If you have any questions, let me know.